Okay, thank you everyone for showing up. My name is David Cower. Thanks for the introduction. Emerita is listed on the venture under EMO, and we're focused on VMS deposits in the Iberian Pyrite Belt in Spain. The usual forward-looking statements. There won't be a test on that at the end. So we have three projects that we're going to talk about briefly today. The main one is the Iberia Belt West project, which is where the focus of our work has been for the last number of years. We have just started drilling on Noeva Tio, which is about 80 kilometers to the east. And we'll talk a little bit about the lawsuit on the Asnalcollar project right at the end and the status of that. In terms of the Iberia Pyrite Belt, it is one of the most prolific VMS belts in the world. There's lots of activity there, existing operations. And on IBW, we own that 100%. There are no royalties on the property. We'll just carry on. I may just skip this slide in the interest of time because the next one is similar and more detailed. There we go. So Iberia Belt West is, of course, on the west side of the Pyrite Belt near the Portuguese border. The main operations in this region are Lundin, of course, at Neves in Portugal, about 60 kilometers away. Sandfire, formerly the Trafigura operation at Aguas. Sandfire bought that about a little less than 2 years ago. And Atalaya has the famous Rio Tinto mine, where Rio Tinto, the company, got its start about I think it was in the 1800s actually. And then Las Cruces is the First Quantum operation, which is recently mined out, but they have a feasibility on an underground operation. You can see our properties there again, the Iberia Belt West project. And Noeva Tio is a very interesting project, much more grassroots, but very well located stratigraphically. You can see we have about a 23-kilometer long property there. On the west side of it, we're looking at the Rio Tinto operation. On the east side, we're looking, at Asnalcollar and Las Cruces. There are three small past producers in that package, and it really hasn't seen any modern exploration that we can find evidence of. So on Iberia Belt West, I think the most, other than all of the drilling that we did last year, we had 15 drills running up until April of this year to put together the resource there, and we in September applied for the exploitation license. And that actually was a very important step for the company because it completely changed the way the regulators view the project as well. Once you go from exploration to applying for an exploitation license, of course, the implication is for both the community and the regulators that you have a project that looks like it could be built. We're doing the metallurgical sampling right now, or testing right now. It's being done at Port Armstrong. We expect those results around the end of this month. That's obviously an important catalyst for the company. And we'll get into detailed engineering and more detailed permitting once the exploitation license is resolved. On that front, we will be submitting essentially a scoping study with full environmental plans to the government by the first week of December. And we'll continue through the process from there to develop a mine. It's a little bit slow on the advance here. Apologies. There we go. The resource that we put out in May of this year was 14 million tons of indicated and about 4.7 million tons of inferred. And we did not have metallurgy to support that, and it was based on a zinc equivalent cutoff similar to what's being used at Aguas at the operation. So the the recovery factors that were used were based on what Wardell Armstrong's metallurgical division felt might represent, based on their experience in the area, a reasonable revenue model as opposed to the actual recovery. So the metallurgy that we're doing is very important, obviously, to this resource, particularly as this deposit, the Romanera deposit, is quite unusual in that there's quite a high-grade gold zone in it, which is not seen in other deposits in the region. And there's no real analogy for that. So we've only given it about 20% recovery for the gold. There's nominally around 800,000 ounces in this resource, and obviously some upside there if we can do a much better job. And the gold is kind of understated in that overall resource in that it doesn't occur ubiquitously. There's actually zones of gold enrichment, so we're looking at 3 to 7 gram material as opposed to trying to recover gold from a large low-grade zone. In terms of how the project stacks up with other projects in the area, you can see us in the box in the middle. If you add the inferred and indicated, which you're not supposed to do, I realize, that grade comes up to about 8.6. The green boxes are based on the published data for recovered grades. And the difference between those and the orange box, which is Lundin Mining is an in situ grade. If we just take the in situ grade of our deposit without recovery factors, it's actually around 10.6. So from a grade perspective, we're basically right in the ballpark of the operators in the region. And then from a market valuation perspective, we've included Foran and Adriatic. And really, we're probably, based on drilling that we've done since this resource was put out, closing in on something well north of 20 million tons at somewhat better grades in an area of very good infrastructure. Quite a bit bigger than Adriatic. They're, of course, higher grade and close to production. So really to point out, they're looking at 800 million-ish market caps versus 80 or less right now for us. And as we move the project along, hopefully this valuation will track in that direction as well. So this was the resource for Romanera. I mentioned the 18.8 million tons if you combine the inferred and indicated. All of that drilling that you see below the deposit, and even some that's in it, the lighter colored holes, have been drilled since that resource was calculated. And there are very good thick intercepts down there. So we do see a significant increase. We've probably got now about 200 meters of additional extent on the deposit versus what was done there. And there are some intersections in the 20, 30, 40 meter range. So when we restate the resource, hopefully that will be a stronger number. And you can sort of see on that lower zone, the lower lens, there's a very strong high-grade plunge to that part of the deposit. And in the green on this, those are drilled massive sulfides that are below cutoff. Some of those areas have quite high gold. And because of the 20% gold recovery, they fall below the cutoff grade. So again, if we can improve the gold recovery, some of that material may come back into the resource as well. The other really interesting thing that we have seen for the first time recently is this copper intersection. Most of the deposits in this belt have a copper zone somewhere, and we really haven't seen it here as yet. So this was the first hole where we've actually seen about 11.7 meters of 2.9% copper, and a second zone of 8.7 of 2.5. What we're seeing down in that area at the base of that purple zone is it looks more like the core of the deposit than the edge. And of course, the copper zone typically is where the feeder zone is in these systems. It's the hotter part of the system typically where the copper comes out. And we'll see. The sense is that there's probably a lot of room to continue to expand this deposit. The deepest holes that we've done to date, we do borehole geophysics, and they certainly tell us it extends at least another 100 meters, which is about what we can see. So our follow-up right now actually is to try to expand this copper zone as part of this program. Just some of the highlights, really. There are very good widths in there, decent grades. It's a nice steeply dipping deposit. The two lenses where they occur are far enough apart that you should be able to mine them separately. So we would be envisioning a bulk mineable underground ramp accessible development here. The second deposit on the property, which is about 6 kilometers to the east, is this Infanta deposit. It's a complexly, a little more structurally complex in that there's some thrusting associated with this, such that it's quite attenuated. The distance across that drilling is about 1.4 kilometers. And it's continuing, but there's a really high-grade core at surface that's probably close to 20% zinc equivalent. And it extends down to about 120 meters or so. That will be a very interesting little bolt-on. And this deposit, where it's very high-grade, has almost no pyrite. It's almost all base metal sulfides. So we see grades in there upwards of 3% copper and 20% zinc and high lead and silver. So that will be another nice little add-on, because the capital will be borne by the big deposit. The NPV of something like this can be very good. There is actually a third deposit in between that we don't really have much data on. It's called El Cura. We had started to drill that, but it's really not going to impact the feasibility work that we're doing in the coming year. It'll be something that will come in later. So we decided to focus the drilling on Romanera and the Noeva Tio project. So Nuevo Tintillo, as I mentioned, it's closer to Sevilla in the next province over, about 80 kilometers to the east. It's a 23-kilometer long belt, and if you can see that inset map below, you can see the Rio Tinto mine up in the top left corner, and then Asnalcollar and Cova de las Cruces, two very large deposits to the east. It's about 23 kilometers long. That small green claim in the middle we don't own. There is a small deposit, past producer there. And then the other two deposits on the east, or the west side, you can actually look across at Rio Tinto from there. They produced about 100 years ago. They're quite small, but very little in the way of exploration. We can find no drilling, in fact, on those deposits. We completed the airborne last year, and we've done detailed gravity over that area where the Santa Flora mine and the Nazareth mine were on the west side. And that's the area that we just started drilling in the last 2 weeks. We're on the first hole. Nazareth reportedly, from the archives, shipped 6% copper over to Rio Tinto at some point in its history. Santa Flora, from what we can see, also has quite a bit of copper in the waste dumps, but perhaps more base metals as well. It's going to be a very interesting program. We've got, the recipe for this belt is EM with a gravity anomaly, as with many VMS terrains, I guess. And certainly that's what we've lined up. And the stratigraphy that we've done careful mapping here really aligns very well with what you see at Rio Tinto. That 500 million tons at Rio Tinto is actually in several deposits. Some are entirely in the volcanics, and primarily the big ones are on the volcanic sedimentary contact. We've got exactly that contact, and we see those relationships here. So it's going to be an interesting couple of months as we test these targets. We have been able to expand our land position around this property as well, so these blue claims will come in And again, this area just has seen minimal exploration for many, many years. So the last thing I'll talk about is Asnalcollar. It is really one of the best undeveloped polymetallic deposits. In fact, it was developed at one time, and as many people will remember, they had a tailings collapse in the late 90s. And subsequently, it was taken over by the government, and the operator left the country. It was reclaimed and put back out for public tender. But the Los Frailes mine was a 73 million ton open pit. But even within the previous operators' estimates, there's a 20 million ton high-grade zone of over 10% copper, lead, zinc with about 84 grams silver. And in fact, we see a lot of room to expand that. This has been involved in a lengthy legal battle as a result of that public tender. And really, the outcome here is based on Spanish law. If a crime is committed in awarding a public tender, that bid must be disqualified, and it must go to the next highest bidder. And we were the only other qualified bidder in that process. So that 5 Superior Court judges have ruled that the crimes were committed. 16 people are up for sentencing, and the date of that final phase of the trial is March of 2025. So it's a matter of time, but the Superior Court also declared there would be no more grounds for appeal or no more evidence to be included. As I mentioned, this is our model from when we did the public tender. The Los Frailes lens is the one in between. This is the one we did our work on. It's drilled as a reserve for the open pit mine that was there. The original mine on the property, which predates this, was the Asnalcollar open pit. So there's a second large open pit. That was a 90 million ton deposit. And about half of that deposit is still there. And this third deposit, actually it's a bit offset, but it's in between, is not really well drilled off. But we see similar high grades in the drilling that's there based on our compilation that we see in the Los Frailes lens. And the important thing is we're not looking at this as an open pit either. It really should not have been an open pit in my view. This is a cross-section from the previous operator's work. You can kind of see faintly the outline of the open pit. And by open pitting this, you were going to have a terrible strip ratio. And if you look at what they're mining, where those lenses come into the pit, it's very lensy in that area, and it's quite low grade. And in fact, when you get out to the edges of these deposits in this area, you get a lot of deleterious elements as well. The real value in this deposit, and most of the tons are, if you look in those last 3 holes, basically, the 3 deepest ones, the deposit gets nice and thick, the lenses coalesce, the grade is higher. And so by going underground, and we're only about 300 meters, that deepest hole below the pit at this depth, you actually get into the best part of the deposit right away. You'll have much better outcomes, much higher grades to deal with. And of course, that deepest hole, because it was an open pit, they didn't drill it very deep, is 45 meters thick. So that our model on the previous page shows 28 million tons of high grade at about 10%. You don't really even need 10% combined lead, zinc, silver. But there's certainly room to grow this at shallow depths. So this is a very important deposit and outcome for the company. And the last thing I'll say, because it's not advancing, is maybe I'll even go to the last one. The area is, in terms of the business climate, has never been better. The Andalusia government has declared underground mining as a preferred economic activity, and the European Union has come out with a mandate for critical minerals and designated this area as a potential critical supply of minerals to the European Union. And they're backing that with a very large fund to support development projects. I think I'm out of time, so I'll cut it off there, and I don't know if there's time for a question.